to be controlling ourselves the whole time is a pathology. It's a pathological situation. It feels terrible and there's no good can come out of it. When we start controlling ourselves, we just end up forever needing to control ourselves more and more, so that controlling breeds the need to control. And the reason for that is that controlling reinforces the sense of our distrust for ourselves. So the more I distrust myself, the more averse I am going to be towards relinquishing control. And then, because I am controlling, it sets up an unconscious resistance, so that what I'm trying to control fights back at me. So I need to control more, and the prospect of how terrible it will be if it ever all goes pear-shaped and I can't control anymore looms ever larger as a worst case scenario, as a fearful, very fearful worst case scenario. And so we follow this road, and we get to a point where we can't control anymore, because eventually the fear becomes too great, the resistance that we're setting up becomes too great, and at that point we feel that we're going to crack up and the very bad thing is going to happen. And possibly we can hang on in that state for an indeterminate length of time, fighting off the inevitable, delaying the crisis that we know is going to happen. And that's not much fun, obviously. And then eventually we really can't control, and then we do crack up, as the phrase is. So it's not really a bad thing from that point of view, because it's a blessed relief. What is the bad thing is when we keep on putting money on that horse and saying it has to come in for me. I have to be able to control successfully. So there's nothing worse than this scenario where we end up thinking we have to control ourselves, and we reach the point where in the end we can't, because whatever we're controlling to be one way, there's a force kicking back in the other way. And this, we can see this happening in specific instances, that if I try to be celibate and control all my sexual impulses, the sexual impulses don't go away, they get stronger and they become tormenting. So this unhealthy situation arises where the sexual impulse becomes demonic, it becomes perceived, and it acts as a demonic force. So what we repress or deny does turn demonic, which means we need to control it even more, which means that it becomes even more demonic, and it'll break loose. The demon will break loose one day, as we know. Appetite is the same thing. If we try to fight against our appetite, supposing I'm suffering from anorexia and I want to be in control of my appetite then becomes a monster, and my life is dominated by it, or my need to struggle against it. And that's not a happy situation, so I definitely don't gain any benefit from that. And those two examples are fairly obvious. But when we look at the situation of mental health in general, it's strange how fond we are of the language of control, and how therapies increasingly sound more and more like clever ways of staying in control. We manage everything. We manage our emotions. We self-soothe if the emotions become too intense. We manage our anger. We manage our anxiety. We correct our own thinking, or restructure our own thinking if it becomes troublesome. So that's a lot of stuff to be doing. And yet if we were to just go into it a bit and think about, what is this situation? Supposing I am going around controlling myself all of the time. What kind of a life is that? And the answer is, it isn't a life at all. It's a sham of a life. We're not supposed to be controlling ourselves. Like every now and again, it can be necessary. If you've already had enough donuts and you think, oh, I'd like just one more, in that case, okay. Just don't reach out for the 6th or 7th donut or whatever the hell it is, and that's okay. Or if I get really annoyed with someone and I want to punch them, it can happen. I'm better off controlling myself and not doing that. So control has its place. But when we're controlling the whole time, we're in this odd situation where we're in directed mode. Directed mode is where nothing happens unless I direct for it to happen. Now, just sticking with this for a moment or two, if I am in directed mode, that means I never do anything unless I've told myself to do it. I never say anything unless I've told myself to say it. The whole of my output is the result of choice. My entire output is purposeful. And when we think about that, we might think, yeah, that's good, isn't it? Sounds kind of good. And then when we look into it more, we realize that is a nightmare. The extent of which we can't even begin to imagine until we actually go down it. It's a living horror, and to say that it's a living horror still doesn't do justice to just how appallingly frightful this way of existing is. The redeeming factor of life is that it surprises us. In fact, that's not even a very good way of saying it. Life is a continuous surprise. Life is the process of being surprised moment by moment. And you could say that reality is a process of unfolding or becoming moment by moment, which is an equivalent statement. So to be alive is to be surprised. But if everything I do is purposeful and I'm in control all the time, the one thing that's never going to happen is that I'm going to be surprised. I've got security, ontological security of never being challenged in any essential way in terms of who I think I am and what I think the world is, because it always is going to fit my idea. But the price I pay for that security is that nothing ever surprises me. I certainly don't surprise myself. So what that means is that if all my behavioral output is on purpose, decided in advance, that means that what I'm looking at the whole time is a reflection of my own thinking, or a reflection of my own mind, or a reflection of my own assumptions about reality. And that reflection rebounds instantaneously. There's just me and my reflection. And in that situation where there's just me and my reflection, which is claustrophobically bouncing back at me wherever I look, there's no space. There's no possibility of anything else coming into that picture. And by anything else, I really mean anything that isn't a reflection of my mind, or anything that isn't a reflection of my assumptions. So it's a sterile situation. Reality itself doesn't get to come into that situation. It's only me and my goals. And sometimes I achieve the goals and sometimes I don't. But that's all that is. It's just my relationship with my goals. And if I achieve them, I feel good. If I don't, I feel bad. But that is a tautological loop. That is a world made up of me in a private universe that is me, and there's nothing else. Now, in our ordinary day-to-day consciousness, it's not easy to appreciate just how much suffering that entails. But it is actually the ultimate in suffering. It's a hell state, technically speaking. It is a hell state. And hell, as we all know, is synonymous with suffering. But not just suffering, it's like suffering that's gone beyond what we normally know as suffering. So to be trapped in oneself is a hell state. There's no doubt about that, it absolutely is. And even though we don't know it, if we did actually get into that, end up in that situation, then we'd know about it. And so if you've ever been in that situation, and I have, we can agree that that is hell. That really is hell. And so that kind of makes it rather odd that so much emphasis is on controlling when it comes to therapies, psychological therapies, mental health therapies, because all that ever does is take us closer to that claustrophobic, solipsistic, seamless world of self. As Gibson puts it, it brings us closer and closer to that most inimicable of states, the most horrific of states. Because control is always seeking security. And the more we seek security, the more we imprison ourselves, and the more we isolate ourselves and cut ourselves off from reality. And when we're suffering from some form of neurosis, it's always because we've already narrowed ourselves down too much. We've already tried too hard to be secure in this world, and then the suffering that entails manifests. And so then we go to therapy and we learn how to manage that suffering, so it's maybe not so bad. We can get it under control a bit. And it seems that we are profoundly unable to understand the irony of that. We really don't want to be walking around the whole time controlling ourselves. I could control everything I think, everything I do, everything I say. So that is a state of imprisonment. And I'm being controlled. There's controlling going on there, but the question is, who's controlling? And I could say, well, I'm controlling myself. But that isn't really true, because it isn't me. Because whenever I try to control myself, I set the thinking mind above myself as my master. And the thinking mind isn't me. It's kind of a robot. It's a machine. So really, I've handed over responsibility for my life to a machine to tell me what to do and to what to think and how to see reality and all the rest of it. So the one who controls is always a machine. It's what we could call the abstract controller. And it isn't us. It is entirely existing within the realm of thought. And thought is not us. Thought is not reality. Thought is an abstract kind of a thing. And to make life subservient to that abstract kind of a thing with its rules and its ideals is to create huge suffering. So if I am being controlled, it's not really me that's controlling it. I'm being controlled by the thinking mind. And the thinking mind works well when it has a subsidiary position. So if I'm the king, the thinking mind is he's one of my staff, really. He does certain jobs, and that's fine. Because there is a higher authority than the thinking mind in that case. Let's just say that the thinking mind is the chancellor and I'm the king. The chancellor will do this and do that, but it'll always be guided by me in that, which isn't to say that I control him, but I'm there to see that he doesn't go too far. And everything he does is different because he's not acting. The thinking mind isn't acting as an authority in itself, so the quality of its actions is different. It's tempered by consciousness, you could say. But then when that situation gets flipped over and the tool starts to use the user of the tool, the one who should be using the tool, then that is the classic inversion that takes place in unconscious living. We become controlled by our minds. So we're all controlled by our minds anyway, in as much as we're all psychologically unconscious. So to become even more controlling is hardly a good news in that case. It wasn't the answer in the first place. To have more of it is not going to bring about any mental health. The best thing is to be walking around not controlling ourselves at all, not even thinking that we could or should, or will I control myself or will I not. Absolutely no thought of controlling ourselves, and just walking around and doing whatever we're doing. So that is freedom. And another way of saying that is to say that the psyche is a spontaneous thing. It happens. It's a happening, but it is not told to happen by some little thinking mind somewhere. So that the psyche is an unfashionable notion in psychology. And more than unfashionable, it's kind of unmentionable. It won't be mentioned because what the hell is the psyche? Is the psyche a scientific concept? And because psychology as a discipline is very keen to appear to be scientific, so as to kind of make the grade with all the other sciences, the proper sciences, physics, biology and chemistry. So because psychology wants to be seen as a science, it makes the mistake of only ever talking about what can be rationally described, what can be defined in very clear, unambiguous terms. And whatever it is that can be defined or described in such a way isn't reality. It's just part of the abstract world of ideas and thoughts. And because the abstract world of ideas and thoughts is so qualitatively different from who we are, what we are, which is not a thought, we fundamentally miss everything. It's as if we're afraid of the irrational, afraid of what can't be explained. And yet what it means to be a human being is irrational and absolutely can't be explained or described. And our very lives, if we were to live true to ourselves, we'd be living spontaneously. Our whole existence would be a surprise, something unprecedented, something that does not fit a template or a generic description of how things are going to be. So we would have moved, we are continually moving beyond our own understanding, beyond our own mind. So every moment we are moving beyond what we understand. And that's what it means to be alive. That's what it means to be real. So when we don't do that, as I said, we're not actually alive. We're kind of mimicking life, or we live in a kind of a mockery of life, a tame or safe mockery of life that never goes beyond the known, we never go beyond ourselves, our idea of ourselves. So the whole of life becomes twisted so that all we ever want to do is get the world to accord with this idea of ourselves that isn't us, and that we never go beyond. If we went beyond it, we'd see that it isn't us. An idea of ourselves that we go beyond isn't us, obviously. But we're in this psychostatic state where we never go beyond it. And the only thing that interests us is controlling and manipulating the world. So that it agrees with what that psychostatic mind wants. So really the psychostatic mind is trying to turn the whole universe into a reflection of it. It seems like a good thing. It seems like a great thing. And that's what we're gunning for the whole time. Thinking that it's a good thing, anticipating that it will be a great thing. That's when we win the game, when we get everything to be the way that we want it to be. And not seeing that that state, what we're aiming at, what we're trying to bring about, is the ultimate horror, the nature of which we cannot even begin to grasp. We don't have the imagination for it. So perversely, what we see as a good thing and we want to bring about is the very worst thing there ever could be. And yet from the point of view of the thinking mind, we're never going to understand that. Okay, thanks for watching.